My name is Charles Tutagalevao. I'm one of the service managers for the Pacific Mental Health at Counties Manukau, and this has been invited to come onto the program leads team this year. So very excited to be a part of the team and to share with you some of the experiences from our part of the woods and how we progress some of the work that we've come together to talk about today. And so e vea lau leo e whai masui o le mato ofisa, mato whaafelo ai atu, ma whaatalofa atu, le pa ia, ma mamalu o lasi o le tato matanga luenga le mental health. Mato te whelo ai atu, ma mato whaape atu, ia susu mai te tala mai a au. Malo le Leigh, whakalofa lai atu, Pula Whānau, and a warm Pacific greetings to everyone today. I'd like to also welcome all our participants who have joined us this morning. We have quite a large constituents across the country who've zoomed in this morning and represented right across from the sector, from the Ministry of Health, DHBs, our NGO partners, the Health and Quality Safety Commission, Health and Disability Commission, our rangatahi and our Whānau advisors. I'd like to also briefly acknowledge our KPI program sponsors who are here this morning. And this is quite a remarkable event. This is the first time we're hosting our KPI forum on this platform, and it really reflects the unique context in which we find ourselves in this COVID situation. This KPI program is an example of the strength of our united vision and collective action. So today is an agenda full with celebrating how we have adapted and responded as a sector through these interesting and uncertain times. It's also about learning and leveraging the value of the KPI program to build a data set of experiences that we can benchmark against, and we take forward our learnings and implement them into how we action to improve mental health services for our rangatahi and whānau who are accessing these services across the country. So we today share a belief that informed practice and collective action drives better well-being for all, and are thrilled to be able to facilitate this space to expand connections, enhance our collaboration, and learn through data that ties us together. So today we will cover off briefly some of the aspects that are on the screen now. And while Zoom is fairly new to some of us, I know from where I'm at, this has been a very interesting experience over the last 2 months with virtual meetings and whatnot. There are some limitations to this, and so we hope that you'll bear with us as we kind of work through this Zoom virtual platform over the next 2 hours. So to help us all get most out of this virtual experience, we have put together a few points on Zoom, just some etiquette, and I'm sure that many of you have already been working in this new way of virtual environment, and so some of these etiquettes are very known to you now. I do have a great team, a KPI team of technical support and others who are going to be supporting me today to facilitate the 2 hours that we have together. And so they will help us move across different screens, and towards the end of our session there will be a facilitated breakout space for us to have those discussions. So please note that today's meeting, the presentation parts will be recorded, but the chats and the breakout sessions will not be recorded, and this is to ensure that the presentations and key parts of the forum will be made available to those who have not been able to attend today. We will make sure that this information will be shared via the KPI website and our newsletter as well. Now, of course, if you do not wish to have your image shown or recorded, you can use the camera disable function and just let the team know by email, and we can edit that as well. So just before we carry on, I just want to check if anyone has any questions at this point. Okay, great. Well, let's continue. So you may be aware, early this year we were informed that Te Pou was selected to take part of the role as the new KPI program host. And so Te Pou have been hosting the program since the 1st of April, and their Chief Executive, Rae Lamb, wishes to acknowledge this milestone and commence the Child and Youth Forum today, and has provided us with a short video message. So we'll play that now. Thanks.
Kia ora, ko Rae Lamb aho. I'm Chief Executive of Te Pou o Te Whakaara Nui. We're honoured to have been passed the baton to host the New Zealand Mental Health and Addiction Key Performance Indicator program over the next 3 years. We appreciate that the program's been built over more than a decade by many hands, and it retains its unique qualities of being both sector-led and sector-owned. As we take this forward, we'll do so respecting the energy and brave commitment by you, the sector, to work together to use your mental health data to improve the performance of services. You should be proud as a sector of your sustained dedication to increasing data transparency and to taking collective, informed action on some of our biggest challenges. 2020 has been a year unlike any other so far. To respond, we'll be listening hard to what's needed so we can move the KPI program with you, the sector, as we keep navigating the complexities of the global COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath. The KPI program's in good hands. Our team are here to facilitate action, to provide a central pillar from which the program can continue to grow and thrive to create far-reaching positive outcomes for the people and the communities we all serve. There's more to do on this shared journey, and we'll be working hard to equip you to deliver on a vision for the New Zealand health system where informed practice and collective action drives better well-being for everyone. We're looking forward greatly to working with you, the sector, through the program. It means a great deal to us to be given this opportunity, and I look forward to meeting some of you personally in the coming days and months.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about the technical issue there. And there might be others, so we'll just need to work through them as we go through. So, because there are other clips that we'd like to show throughout today's session. So we're going to start off this morning with looking at the data story, our data story, and what that tells us kind of coming up, leading up to COVID. And so I'd like to invite James, who is our program lead, to talk to us about what our data tells us. So over to you, James.
Thank you, Charles. Morena tātou. Right. So this won't take too long. Life before COVID, the data story. It's quite boring, but I'll try and make it interesting. Can we have the next slide, please? So first slide out there. Now this is so that's quarterly figures, April to June for 2017, 2018, and 2019. Where available, because I think for the Whānau indicator we don't have 2017. So the idea here is we're looking at data patterns for the equivalent quarters for when we experienced the 2 months of highly unusual service delivery during the pandemic. So the idea of this part of the presentation is to create a baseline for you guys so that when the data for this quarter 2020 comes out, we can go back and have a look and see what happened to the numbers. Because essentially what we've been dealt, I mean, you know, there aren't too many silver linings to the pandemic, but one of them is we get to see a little bit of a natural experiment, like what happens when child and adolescent mental health services are forced into a highly unusual and fairly remote pattern of service delivery for several months. So if we just quickly look through that first slide, this is all fairly self-evident. So the green line is that referral to third contact measure, and those of you who've been part of the KPI program for a while will remember that that's the proxy measure that we created as a proxy of time to treatment, whereas referral to first contact is the traditional wait time elapsed between referral and first contact. So you can see that for quarters, that quarter of 2017, 18 and 19, that green line, the referral to third contact's essentially flat. It's creeping up a little for that quarter for referral to first contact. Of course, you know, there's a lot of things you'd want to know to contextualize that data. If you wanted to try and explain why referral to first contact has crept up from 8 to 11 days for those 3 consecutive year quarters, you know, you'd want to know about things like access rates, vacancies in services, case complexity, length of stay in service, those kinds of things. So as always, the data does invite more questions. While we're looking through these slides, I mean, one of the things that we, meaning the program leads, would like you to do is look at that pattern and just think about when you do get your April to June data for 2020, think what would you predict might happen? So moving from all referrals to non-urgent referrals. So again, referral to third contact is essentially flat, so that time to treatment is fairly flat, and time elapsed for the referral to first contacts crept up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, you'd have to say, looking at those slides, there's not a strong pattern of change from one year to the next. Next slide, please. Oh, this is the same data, just broken down by ethnicity. I can't really see anything in those charts that catches my eye. There's not a lot of huge amount of variance. We see if you compare, so Māori, median wait time referral to third contact Māori versus European, we see that that's slightly less for all referrals and much the same for non-urgent referrals, which suggests there's probably a higher level of acuity in the Māori group, I think, in the Pacific Island group. But again, there's not much spread in the data. Next slide, please. Community DNA rates. And again, I think you'd have to say there's not a lot of movement from one year to the next. And the interesting comparisons in that chart are really between the clusters of bars. So obviously we can see significantly higher community DNA rate for Māori versus total, other and European. And remember that we've always thought of the community DNA rate as essentially being a proxy for engagement. Of course, DNA, you know, can be for all kinds of reasons, but the core assumption we've always made is that people tend to DNA because they don't see the value in coming back to the service. And so seeing that higher community DNA rate in Māori versus total certainly would raise questions about confidence that our Māori service users and their whānau have in our services. Next slide, please. Percent of whānau contacts within 14 days. I just have to remind myself. Now that measure is the, I'm just looking at the KPI. So yeah, so that measure is percentage of all whānau contacts that occurred within 14 days of the previous whānau contact. And we don't obviously have 2017 data for that. I'm presuming it's kind of obvious that we weren't collecting it then. And wow, I mean, there's really no spread in that data at all. So there's nothing intrinsically interesting comparing the 2018-2019 quarters, but it'll this is useful to have, obviously, as a benchmark. So when we look at the data coming for this quarter of 2020 and see what the comparison is. Next slide, please. Percent of whānau contacts in first 6 months of referral within 7 days. Right, so this is the percentage of whānau contacts that are in the first 6 months of the start of the referral that occurred within 7 days. So okay, so this measure is when you're in the first 6 months of treatment with a patient and their whānau, the expectation is contact, that there should be a 7-day time span between one whānau contact and the next. So this measure is, well, how often did that actually happen? And again, you can see all the data sits essentially between the 40 and 50%. See someone's having an earthquake. It's a little bit distracting. Yeah, next slide, please. Percent of whānau contacts after 6 months referral. Yeah, so, and again, for those of you who recall how the whānau engagement measure was developed, so you know, there's some implicit assumptions in here in terms of benchmarking and our expectation of what would be normal or good clinical practice. So we're saying here with this measure that beyond 6 months from initial referral, then we would expect whānau contact with a frequency of every 21 days or less. So what percentage of whānau contacts achieve that goal or that target? And again, we can see all of the bars in the chart sit around the 60% mark with not much variation from one quarter to the next. I mean, you have to say, looking at bars like this, that any difference in the height of them is really probably just within sort of measurement error. Right, next slide, please. Oh, that's it. So I cannot recall how much time we have allocated to this segment of the agenda. I think not very much, maybe about a quarter of an hour, but there's some time to take questions if people have them.
James, there's a question from Sarah. Given the data is pretty stable, in particular the wait times, and we know this creates angst, what do you and other participants think we could or should do going forward to impact this? We don't want to still be here in 3 years looking at it all of us sitting just under the target.
Okay, so how do we get wait times down? We employ more staff. And we build up secondary mental health services. You know, I think the answers are usually fairly simple, aren't they? I mean, I'd be interested to know what other people think of that. I mean, I know the recent mental health review put a very strong emphasis on building the services at a grassroots community level, primary care, NGO, Kaupapa Māori and Pacifica, and other kinds of services that articulate really well with, you know, engage with the community at that level. But I just have a concern that we're maybe doing that at the expense of secondary service provision. I think if we grow primary level mental health service, we're probably going to see an influx of referrals. Right, what is Rebecca? Rebecca says Sarah is referring to the MOH wait times target. I think something possibly positive is that waiting times to subsequent contacts are dropping.
James?
But yeah.
James, it's Catherine here. I'm wondering if you've got, have we broken down any of the figures for the Maori mental health and the non-attendance or the DNA rate? And is that for teams with specific services versus teams without specific services?
I don't think it's, no, I don't think it's further broken down. Rebecca Merrington would probably be able to speak to that.
Would it be worth trying to break it down a little bit more?
And what do you mean, Catherine? What's your idea?
Well, I just wonder, with say, with example, with our Maori mental health service here, do we have a very similar DNA rate to our generic CAMS teams? Is
Right.
it so?
Okay.
ICAFS doesn't have a specific service. Is their DNA rate different for their young people attending their teams versus a specific service?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, the lowest, is the right phrase? Lowest, the most fine-grained level of resolution we get is by DHB. I don't think we can drill down by DHB, and not at any lower level than that. I mean, locally, in any DHB that chose to, I mean, because remembering, we're all working fundamentally off the prime data set plus whatever local data gathering DHBs are doing, and it would be possible for any DHB to do some more kind of data mining, but they would need the time and energy and resourcing to do that.
I mean, I'm not sure it'd be that difficult. I mean, we could tell you Capital Coast does have a separate service that the Hutt Valley doesn't and the Wairarapa doesn't. So I'm sure within the 20 DHBs, it won't take us long to work out what proportion have culturally specific services and whether their DNA rates are different to those with non-culturally specific services. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And in terms of the sort of practicalities of analysing the data, I mean, any DHB could easily do it locally because they'll be able to see when they're sort of gathering and submitting data, they can see which teams it's coming from.
Can I make a comment?
Yep.
I was just wanting to make a comment about the specific value of the DNA measure, reminding the group that this is about barriers to access and engagement, a very, very loose proxy. But the difference in Māori and non-Māori DNA rates really should be the focus of this group's discussion. It's clear marked and action should be taken.
Yeah, can I also just add that, often we present at the, our, these meetings, the split between ethnicity, and we often, as part of our story, lies, the different focuses. And so we do demonstrate in our in our storyboards that, particularly looking at Counties Manukau, that our focus has been around Māori and Pacifica, and we have done something different in the last 4 years around repositioning our Māori and Pacifica workforce, and so that adds to that narrative, and we see that in the data. But it'd be interesting to see what Catherine is referring to across the country, where there are, where the DNA rate sits, and are there specific focuses in areas where the DNA rates are much better than other areas where there isn't a specific focus around Māori, or specific services focused at Māori and Pacifica?
I mean, I think that's our first step in working out how to address those inequalities, is to see what data do we know about why those inequalities are occurring, would be my thought.
Yes. So I'm just thinking about where we can try and provide this data in the next catch up, whether we can provide that split across the DHBs. But as I said, I think a lot of the DHBs have very specific services that are addressing some of these inequities, and it'll be good to hear from what the DHBs are doing around this.
Yeah. Hey, can I ask a technical question? So one of the reasons for us doing this presentation today was just to show the participants what the April to June quarter looked like, 2017, 18 and 19, and to get people thinking about what they would expect to happen to their data. Now, of course, a lot of us did initial assessments and follow-up by telephone and video conference during the pandemic. And I'm just looking at the data entry drop-down box that we've got, because ours was changed locally so that we have additional categories for mode of service delivery. So we have a video conference and phone contact with patient. We've got 7 now boxes to choose from. And I'm just thinking in terms of data analysis when we get round to looking to this quarter of 2020. I'm presuming that because the number of face-to-face will plummet, but a lot of us were doing video conferencing as a proxy for face-to-face, whether we'll be able to analyze the data both ways. So you're essentially chopping it up twice, once by true face-to-face, which you'd expect to fall very low, and then the proxy face-to-face by video conferencing, and just what people think about that.
The video conferencing is included in face-to-face contact. So AV is included into face-to-face contact. So it's telephone that is not included for the waiting times, which could be a little bit problematic.
Okay, right. So with those mode of delivery choices, anything, so ours we code face-to-face as a 1 and video conference as a 4. 1s and 4s are both counted as face-to-face and primed, but phone is not. Just kind of interesting, because I mean, I had contact with patients during the pandemic through all kinds of modalities: text, email, FaceTime, Messenger video, Zoom, and for some, particularly if connections were not good, we just, and I can think of a few video calls I did that we had to go just to audio only because we didn't have good bandwidth and we kept dropping out. But the assessment and the treatment I delivered in that context was, to me, no different to having a video on screen. It was the same kind of mahi. So, yeah, okay.
James, there's a couple of other questions, and I'm just keeping an eye on our
Sure.
time. So, and I think you've just touched on this. Sharon's question around, given COVID lockdown, some assessment sessions took place over the phone. How will the measure? How will the measure account for this? I think so. I think some of this will also come in the breakout discussions that we're going to have later down. Down in the sessions. There's one here about, are wait times different for teams that are using Kappa? Any thoughts on that?
Charles, I think when we look at the historic data for wait times across all of the DHBs, there's a variety of services who've got Kappa implemented across a spectrum of kind of rigorousness, really, and there's very little difference. There's, I know ADHB operate a form of the Kappa model, and at Waitemata we have really high fidelity to the model. Our wait times are pretty equal pegging, so there isn't strong evidence from my understanding of the data that Kappa specifically impacts positively on wait times.
Yes. Thanks for that, Sarah. And there's a question from Ennis around, would Zoom be helpful to reduce wait times? And I think we've touched on, so Zoom is counted as face-to-face activity and therefore does affect the wait times as well. There was a comment made earlier on about the slide where you showed the ethnicity split around defining other, and perhaps maybe being more precise around defining what that group looks like or what that group refers to. So we'll take that comment on board. Is there anything there?
No, I've just had a scroll back through all the questions and comments, Charles. I can't see anything else that we probably need to address. I think we've got most of it for now. Yeah. So I think next is whichever forum comes immediately after April to June 2020 data being available, that forum will be the one where I think we'll probably spend a significant chunk of time looking at patterns in the data during the pandemic period of service delivery, and see what messages we can take from that. So that's going to be really interesting when we get to it, I think.
Yes, yeah.
Cool.
Great,
Okay,
thanks, James.
cool. Kia ora.
Okay, so we're scheduled for a 5-minute break now, and just going to look across to my team. And so what's going to happen is that there will be a 5-minute clock countdown, and then people will be switched back on into this session. So, so we'll see you shortly. Thank you. Oh, welcome back, everyone. So before we go through to the next session, would like to share a short video with you, and this is really in recognition of the shared journey that the sector has had over the past 2 months, where we've been able to deliver and receive services through a very unique period of time. It has not been easy, and we know the journey is still ongoing, and we wanted to celebrate how our sector, our rangatahi and Whānau has responded. We've asked for stories that captures the moments that have made people feel proud and what has given them hope. So to share the learning that has emerged and created space for new possibilities in our mental health sector and addiction services, we'd like to start this session with this video. So we'll just play for you now.
We had to be a little bit creative.
We had a talent show thing for each region, which Midland took out. We also had people speaking, like Sal. Yeah, it was just a real fun, big, happy, hearty party.
Which was over Zoom, which was mean.
We're the Nicks. Nikki.
Nicola.
Throughout lockdown, we initiated a process to ensure that tangata whaiora were contacted by staff. We wanted the contact to be more than just simply a hello and goodbye, and so we developed a wellbeing check template to be utilised.
The expectation was that all tangata whaiora would be contacted at least weekly.
Something that was created in the team that I work was a flyer that had some really useful information about what was going on, some useful helpline numbers to make contact with, and then some really good hints and tips and advice about how to maintain your own well-being in these really, really strange times where your usual supports weren't available to you.
What we wanted was our taiohi to experience something a bit cooler than just being stuck inside. We also wanted to celebrate their success around having to stay put in one place. So we pulled together as a team and we managed to source a whole heap of tents, enough for everybody, and we had a really cool night under the stars.
So what worked really well for us in the mid-central region was actually the ease of access and convenient timing. Some of our NGO services extended their hours. People felt that they could reach out if they needed to reach out, and also Zoom meetings meant that more natural supports and whānau could be at psychiatrist appointments.
also in terms of our mahi, day-to-day mahi, pathways in the Wise Group were amazing for our whānau who did have a difficult time during the lockdown, supplying cell phones, Wi-Fi connection, food and essential supplies services. We were able to really give our rangatahi, our taiwangi and our whānau what they needed.
One of the great things is one of our NGOs did lawn conversations, so even though we couldn't have that face-to-face contact, they could still go and stand on a person's lawn and have that conversation, so it helped ease the isolation.
So what we learned about the phone contacts we had from Tangata Whaiora is that they really liked it, and majority of them actually felt more supported than ever. So given that, we've been developing a way that we would do that and augmenting our face-to-face contact, which has been increasing since we've been going down through the lockdowns.
So we see this as our new way of working, where we're more connected and more flexible.
And what it's allowed us to do is provide opportunity and expectation for different ways of working that I don't think we would have really thought about. We would have just carried on because that was what we did.
Connection is the key thing that we want to do in our service with our people. We have measured it and we have adapted it. We've adapted systems and ways of doing that. So I think it's a huge win.
Awesome video. Okay, look, I'm sure you'll all join me in expressing our thanks and appreciation for the staff, the rangatahi that participated in putting that video together, and thanking them for sharing their story with us. So thanks to the Bid Central team and NGO partners for putting that together. I'd like to present our next presenters are going to share with us, again, looking at some qualitative information on how this experience has been like for some of our DHBs. And so I'd like to invite Angela and Sarah to join us now. Over to you, team.
Thanks, Charles. I think I'm going to get started. Ko Sarah Wallbank tōku ingoa, ke te mahi ai Waitemata DHB, where I'm the operations manager. So Angela and I have both conducted surveys, Angela more with her team of staff, and at Waitemata for us with some of our service users around their experience of Zoom. So we've got some quantitative data to share and then some qualitative data. We're only going to do 5 minutes each. It's really, really quick, so we will whiz through. So first slide up, thanks, Sarah. So we did a client-based survey over 3 of our CAMS teams, our early psychosis team, infant mental health, and we also have a Ministry of Ed contract for Incredible Years Specialist Service. We're the biggest CAMS in the country and we see approximately 5,000 clients a year, and we were able over the period of March to May to get 200 valid surveys. We actually sent out over 300, but one of the learnings from this is that over 80 of the email addresses we had for people were incorrect and they bounced back. So as with everything, a little bit of learning there, but we got a pretty low 20% return rate, but enough that it gave us a pretty nice picture. So next slide, thanks. So across the ethnicities of responses that we had, we again have that box of other, and I absolutely take on board other people's comments from earlier in the day that needs some breaking down further. This was just taken from what people responded in our survey, and most of the teams that did respond were North Shore and North Auckland based, which is predominantly a European population, so we had a pretty low response from Māori in particular. So you can see there that the age bands, most people that responded were young people responding on their own behalf in the 15 to 17 age group, and 40 to 49 who were parents, and then a smattering across the other age groups. So next slide. One of the key questions we asked was, if you had a choice, would you prefer your future appointments to be a mix of Zoom and face-to-face, just face-to-face, or just Zoom? And pretty clearly there, 60% would like a mix. There are obviously a good proportion of people that just want to stick with face-to-face and a proportion that just want to do Zoom. Unsurprisingly, when we did a little bit of a breakdown, those were people that lived quite remotely, so up in South Head, a lot further away from Auckland, and young people with anxiety. So unsurprisingly, they didn't want to come into the service. And of course, we asked how likely they would be to want to use Zoom again for an appointment, and the majority sat in the extremely likely or likely, with smaller numbers saying very unlikely. As you can see from some of the quotes that we got as well, a lot of the issues for Auckland, and I imagine for some of the more rural DHBs, is travelling, having to schedule time out of work, commute, find parking, and find childcare for siblings while you take a young person to appointments. Okay, next slide. So there was a fairly high proportion of people who felt pretty comfortable with Zoom, but I think for me, the most significant group are those that were uncomfortable or pretty neutral about it. I think we have a potential issue in using technology in this way to further negatively impact equity. So where we've got areas of poverty, people who are unable to access technology, people who are unable to afford data, and may be disadvantaged if we moved too far into the realms of using Zoom. And in the other pie graph, were you able to discuss your concerns openly via Zoom? I think, you know, clearly the majority could, most of the time, but of course that 2% that didn't causes some worry, causes some alarm, and thinking, well, what was the stuff that wasn't divulged that we might have got face-to-face? And I think someone has made a really nice comment about the difficulty in replicating the face-to-face experience and the nuanced communication and body language that you don't pick up when you're doing Zoom. Okay, next one. Quite a lot of interruptions. Oh, we seem to have jumped over one. There we go. Thanks, Sarah. Quite a number of interruptions, which was surprising. Although half had never, the other half had between 1 and 5 times their session was interrupted, which would almost never happen in a kind of a clinic-based setting. Don't really know what impact that might have for people, but clearly one of the comments is that some young people felt anxious that other people would hear their conversations. And in the did you have concerns about privacy, although that's a fairly low percentage, yes, a little bit being 14% and yes, a lot 2%, we drilled into that and identified that that accounted for 7 people, and of them 3 were young people, and 2 in particular were young people identifying as gender diverse and obviously having sensitive issues they didn't feel confident to discuss. So that's a concern in some ways as well. Okay, next one. Most people felt that they were well supported via Zoom, but again, 7% not sure or didn't feel supported, or only somewhat. And looking across to the confidence in implementing therapy suggestions, again, majority felt pretty confident with that. But I think the comment is, the quote below is quite important as well, is we actually did have a number of clients who weren't tech savvy, were actually quite unwell. So in particular in our early psychosis intervention team, they required the highest amount of support, a lot of youth that were quite unwell, thought disordered, and really struggling with being able to connect into meetings and appointments. And so we found that we needed to still see those people face to face. Okay, next one. those were some of the reasons for the Zoom appointment. Groups, doctor's review, 4 were first contact, follow-up and individual therapy, and some other. And the frequency on average seems to be sort of 2 to 6 times people were spoken to on Zoom, and a number of people having more than that and up to 10 times, and only 7 where it was the only time that they were seen via Zoom. Okay, next one. Yes, happy to share the slides, Rosalie. And overall, really, how helpful have you found Zoom? Clearly, the majority have found it helpful or very helpful, but there are obviously a proportion who've found it very unhelpful. And the comments there that young people and families have sent to us is that it would be good to use a mixture in the future, and someone saying, I do prefer face-to-face because it eliminates that risk of people being overheard. So I guess the summary for us is that we will continue to use Zoom as an option on the menu for families and young people, but we don't want to allow it to negatively impact any equity issues. If we use it wisely and with caution, I think we all agree that we'd quite like first appointments where you're endeavouring to build rapport to be face-to-face, not necessarily rigorously, but that should be what we aim for. Real sensitivity about privacy and confidentiality, and we need to keep seeking feedback and developing guidelines so that it remains a safe option for our rangatahi and tauhi. Yes, agree, Joanna. It would be good to know what helpful meant. Yeah, it's just one of those general questions that we could drill into further, but and we may well still contact those whānau that responded and find out a bit more. So I'm going to hand over to Angela now, who's going to carry on with the more staff and her clients' picture of the world during COVID. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Angela Field. I'm the Clinical Nurse Manager for the ICANN service in Lakes DHB. So that's Rarotonga, Taupo and Turangi and surrounding areas. Bring up the next slide, please, Sarah. For those that you don't know, we're actually based in the Rotorua Public Library, Te Akamatua, and the library staff obviously were all sent home to work from home. Very early on in the COVID-19 level 4 lockdown, we had a fire alarm, didn't have a building warden because they were all working from home, and we kind of had to figure it out ourselves, which was interesting. And also kind of odd when we went outside and normally huddle and talk when there's a fire alarm and having to do the physical distancing. So I couldn't help but capture a pic of that because it's just sort of another example of when we had to switch off our autopilot and do things the same but different. Next slide, thanks, Sarah. So we've gathered some feedback from clients and whānau and staff around their experience of working under the COVID-19 lockdowns. Some very similar themes from talking to other DHBs, some stuff that Sarah's already talked about as well. And a real mixed result, and we were sort of surprised at, I think, some of the people who really embraced using audiovisual and others that were really did not want to do it. And some of them preferred to almost huddle down and just wait until we were out of this really weird lockdown experience and wanted to wait until we could do face-to-face. Others embraced it a little bit more, and it was just trying to find that balance. We certainly had an interesting experience trying to use AVL to do a Mental Health Act assessment with people being in different locations around the country, which was an interesting experience. Next slide, thanks, Sarah. Yeah. So there's some of the feedback there around what people had told us as well. Some of the stuff that we heard and was demonstrated as we sort of came out of lockdown is some of the whānau being in lockdown without their regular distractions were actually able to connect together better as a unit, able to reflect on things that were happening within the family and kind of work on some of that stuff, and also having the realization that they can cope with a whole lot more than they thought they could. And that was really lovely to see, that they used their own social supports within their family and supported each other through that. I guess the sad bit or the disappointing bit for some of our young people, when level 3 came in and some and level 2 and some family members had to return to work, they had no choice, that parents were no longer available to participate. So it had been quite a change being able to have both parents available into psychiatrist appointments and psychology appointments, and then suddenly it was all back to some other new normal where parents weren't as available for the young people, which was disappointing for some of our rangatahi. And certainly the connection was, we'll do it because we have to, but we don't actually feel like we're making that same connection with the clinicians. So that was kind of hard. And that was probably more so for the people who hadn't met us, or had only maybe met us once or twice. If there was established relationships, that was a little bit easier, but others found it a little bit harder. Next slide, thanks, Sarah. So, we've got Real, which is our primary mental health service here from Pathways in Rotorua and Taupo, and we had a few similarities. It was harder to engage the new clients via Zoom, or the feedback from Erin at Real was trying to get new clients involved in the virtual groups that they'd set up. That was more difficult, whereas if they had already established those relationships, they're more likely to join in something even though it was a little bit different. The easier to reach clients, so and I think we saw it across both settings, was that those clients who got anxiety, social anxiety, it was far easier to hit answer or connect than it was to worry about prepping to get to an appointment. We had a bit of a discussion about, is that a good thing, a bad thing? Are we not giving them the opportunity to challenge some of those anxieties? But we think that we'd be able to use a mix of those things. Maybe those young people who really struggle to even get into us initially might be able to connect via AVL, and then we might be able to move towards some more face-to-face and group activities. So it does certainly create some more opportunities there. I haven't got Lake's DNA data clearly, but Real's DNA data was interesting. They went from 12% DNAs to 3%, and some of the feedback from staff has been that it was, again, you could reach them on their phones. They didn't have to physically get to an appointment. They didn't have to rely on parents to get them there, didn't have to schedule it around school quite so much. They just wouldn't join their Zoom classes. So that was kind of interesting around that they got a whole lot of movement because they were able to continue on doing their work really consistently. And I think earlier on the slide, there was one around young people saying that they actually had the time to work on some of the stuff rather than leave a clinic appointment and then go ahead and, forget about it until the next week when they had an appointment. So that's interesting. Next slide, thanks, Sarah. We surveyed the staff as well. We just wanted to see what their experiences were like. We're a relatively small ICAMS team. We weren't able to divide into little bubbles and pods like some other places were, and some of that was around where people live and lack of rural broadband and stuff. However, Real was really well prepared to work remotely. They already had devices. We're used to doing some stuff online through Skype and things, so it was only a bit of a shift, really, to be able to work that way. At the DHB, and I'm sure we're not the only DHB that was in this situation, we were not as prepared with devices, remote access for staff, and that took a long time to be allocated. So even for people that were working from home, they didn't necessarily have access to the information they needed to be able to do that stuff completely. It was lovely to hear that Pathways gave staff an hour a day of wellbeing time. So kind of legitimising that self-care needed as part of working from home and encouraging those routines around switching off from work, packing your laptop up, those sorts of things to try and separate the work-life balance. And it was, I just thought that was a lovely way of doing it, acknowledging that it was an important thing to do, particularly when you're not getting that support when you're in person with your colleagues. What was really clear was that all of the staff valued really clear leadership from their managers so that they knew what was happening and when it was happening. It was quite confusing sometimes in the DHB to know what was happening, so doing our best to keep our staff informed about those things. And that certainly as leaders having to work that much harder to connect and support staff who are working remotely while they're dealing with their own worries and challenges of working from home and those sorts of things. Next slide, thanks, Sarah. So we certainly found, once people were home and once they were working from home, that their own anxiety around COVID-19 reduced. But it wasn't without its struggles. We did things like daily team huddles, which we didn't always need, like there wasn't always an update, but it was just nice to sort of come together and we'd do it, or those of us that were here, we'd do it in one room and we'd be physically distancing, and then we'd zoom into everyone that was at home and we'd just catch up, and do those things. So but some of the staff didn't have good experiences and were a little bit put off about the stuff that they missed. So that's something for us to think going forward if we change lockdowns. Next slide, thanks, Sarah. So this was some of the more of the feedback from staff around how we might be able to work differently. Being proud, they were very proud of the way that they did adjust, even though it was not always easy, and helping parents who were a little less IT savvy to be able to do some of these things. So we do want to, and we've already been able to do things like supporting staff, psychiatrists being off sick, and we haven't had a delay in treatment. So so that's me. Thank you.
Great, thanks Sarah and Angela. I would like to bring another perspective, so thank you for that and very insightful information around staff's experience over the COVID period as well as our rangatahi. So I'd like to introduce Leigh, Murray and Joanne Henare, who will provide us a perspective from our Whānau advisor engagement view on this as well. So over to you, Leigh and Joanne. And just if you can unmute it. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Charles, for that introduction, and thank you to Saima and Rebecca from Te Pou and the Child and Youth KPI sponsors for inviting the DHB Family Whānau Advisor Group to speak about the whānau experience during lockdown. Ko Port Hills te maunga, ko Avon te awa, ko Faye Gibson toku whaia, ko Namana Gibson toku matua, ko Limari toku ingoa. You will have heard that I was born in Christchurch, and the Avon and Port Hills are my mountain and river. But I've now lived in Tamaki Makaurau for 40 years, so call myself an Aucklander. And I work in Auckland DHB Mental Health Services as the family advisor. I want to acknowledge it is such a great honour to do this presentation with Joanne Henare, a whānau advisor colleague from Mid-Central DHB. Joanne is on the Health Quality Safety Commission, Quality Improvement Program Leadership Group and the Māori Advisory Group, and brings a whānau perspective to the Te Pou Clinical Sector Reference Group. She and I have been in the role for a while. We've known each other really since we both started over a decade ago, and so it's great to do this with her. So can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. This is just a photo to remind you of, well, just to let you know a bit about the Family Advisor Group. We are currently 17 FTE across New Zealand. Most DHBs do have a whānau advisor, and the people in this, you'll see myself and Joe in this photo. This was taken a couple of years ago. We meet yearly, either in Auckland, Wellington or Christchurch. So this was in Auckland. And I just want to acknowledge a few of those, some of those people have retired and passed on and moved on to other roles. So yeah, I'm just very aware that we are a collective and we consult regularly with each other. Can I have the next slide, please? So preparing for this presentation, we just had a week to do this, and so we didn't really have a chance to set up a survey process as such. And I just want to acknowledge the previous presentations. It's fantastic to see that's taken place and we're getting some rich data. We focused on about 4 things, kind of what worked well, what were the challenges, what were the cultural considerations, and potentially what can we take forward. So these were, there's a child and family unit survey that I have the privilege of been doing that for many years. Sarah will know that. And there was a piece of feedback from a whānau member a couple of months ago who said that, and she really indicated that the inpatient staff were really supportive. My son, who's 14 years, really liked the therapy sessions and being with kids his own age with problems. And it kind of, and I did kind of get we got the impression really that young people admitted to respite in inpatient units in the country found that experience really helpful, and staff probably had more time. There was more social distancing, and yeah, it was just really nice to know that. Also, we got the feedback that we got a sense that there was more timely access to doctors via Zoom or phone, and yeah, that was, as we saw the data from Sarah and Angela, that was appreciated, and especially if you've got childcare issues. And here in Auckland DHB, we have parking issues. Any of those who visited here will know that. So not having to pay for parking, not having to try and find a car park was really appreciated. Also, it was interesting to hear about flexible use of carer support was allowed at this time. And for those who knew about it, they made use of that. So I heard that from a whānau member down in Christchurch. And just having things like, an example was calming sensory items, where you could claim that for your child back via email, which is when there's usually a kind of quite a drawn out process. So just moving on to the next slide, please. And I'm going to hand this to Joanne to talk about. Joanne, can you hear me?
Ai, nā atamari koutou, ko waio, ko tararua te maunga, ko waikawa te awa, ko Ngāti Wehiwehi, me Ngāti Tukore, me Ngāti Mutunga o Whare Kauri, me Ngāti Urban Māori o Tāmaki Makaurau, o Māngere, ko Hoana Henare ahau, he whānau ora kai tautoko, mo te paihau ora o Ruahine o Tararua. Good morning everyone, my name's Joanne Henare, and this slide's really from a cultural perspective in regards to feedback from our area. For Mid-Central actually redeployed all their staff into different teams. So, and as a result of that, there was no kaupapa Māori secondary or service. People were working in teams they've never worked in and roles they've never worked in. So from a cultural perspective, the Mid-Central response to COVID-19 was a big flop in regard to that the whole pathway was culturally blind. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to highlight and acknowledge, you know, we, as a health system, we promote the mantra of holistic approach when working with service users and their whānau. And most people will be familiar with Te Whare Tapawhā, and that's the four cornerstones of well-being. And this is a model that actually can be used for all whānau, no matter what ethnicity. It's an approach that's not well understood by our workforce, and it can be questionable how well it's utilised. The other thing is in regards to when we're working with tamariki and rangatahi, you know, we must take that whānau-centred approach, and assessments for young people with rangatahi must also include an assessment for whānau. And it should never be reduced to the support needs of the parents. It must be extended to include support needs of siblings and extended whānau, whether they be grandparents or uncles or aunts. Of course, there needs to be a strong focus on rangatahi order, so young person well-being, but you know, they can be better supported when we take the whānau order, the holistic approach, the collective approach from a broader family perspective. So when we're working with tamariki and rangatahi and complete assessments, you know, the question for services is, and my question would be how well people actually conduct cultural assessments when they're working with young people from Māori, Pacifica or other minority cultural populations. So that's a question there. You know, it's really important to have that type of assessment because you'll be better placed to look at what support services in your local community can be utilised to better support the whānau. I'll put in there just a mention of cultural sensory support options. People will be familiar with sensory modulation, and sensory modulation also needs to include culturally appropriate options for not just our children and young people, but also for our parents and that as well. So what I'm flagging is the promotion of the inclusion of sensory modulation or sensory support tools and options to be included as a part of a care package for our young people and particularly the whānau, because this can support collective resilience and educate the whole whānau unit. So who best to have that type of knowledge but the actual whānau members themselves. In regards to using Zoom and AVL types of technology, what we've found from feedback that there's been a lack of cultural considerations in regards to tikanga processes. So I'm talking about how you would mihi to individuals or whānau and that during their time. So we need to be mindful that we have available to us easy access to whether it be cultural advisors, whānau advisors or Māori staff to maybe support staff in regard to that engagement, because a lot of feedback we've had, particularly from our local mana whenua and Māori community, is the lack of cultural considerations when engaging with whānau. So that's just flagging that, because, you know, first impressions do matter. And you know, we must always consider and how we are engaging with people so they're better connected with us and feel more comfortable to actually contact us. I have there at the end of the slide the iwi and kaupapa Māori services. You know, nationally what we have to do is build and maintain effective working relationships with our local iwi and kaupapa Māori services. I think nationally in some places we're doing well and others we're not doing so well. And I'm particularly speaking from specialist and secondary service relationships with particularly iwi and kaupapa Māori services. So I'm flagging that. And just to end, I just really want to end with this proverb that translates into, you know, Whānau. Whānau is where whakapapa begins and aroha never ends. Kia ora koutou. Any questions?
Kia ora, Joanne. We've got just a couple more slides and then there might be time for questions.
Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora, Joanne. Yeah, it's awesome to, and I think, yeah, I just think there was a presentation, someone told me about this amazing online presentation they saw from Kaumātua in New Zealand, who talked about how you can deliver Zoom sessions in a culturally safe way. And I think we need to kind of really think about it because we could break down a lot of barriers in the future. So just moving on to challenges that were experienced. And I did, in preparing for this presentation, really appreciated the opportunity to connect with Stephanie Rollinson, who is the Canterbury Child and Adolescent Family Service Family Advisor down there. And she's a current family member of services down there for her two rangatahi. And yeah, I just thought this quote was, it kind of, I think it's great to remember to really be aware of what's happened for Christchurch and Canterbury. And so she said in Canterbury, there's just been this cumulative effect of events and stressors over the last decade. The lockdown raised anxiety and stress for thousands of young people. And it was a cumulative, definitely an accumulative effect. And some of those young people are still struggling to return to school. Parents and grandparents are now doing their best to hold their whānau together. And yeah, she said that it was, yeah, it hasn't been easy. And she's noticed a real increase in anxiety. She has lots of connections down there online. And we have seen the increase in demand and referrals that have come through to CAMHS, especially in the last couple of months. And also the fact that we didn't have physical services, that information on service, on the hours of service delivery or how you could access services wasn't that easy to find. Yeah, we need to perhaps in the future think about that, how we make it all visible on one site. Some of the things were, special needs of young people are difficult to address, with sometimes not being able to leave the home. Often when you have kids who are anxious, being able to connect with the community, distract, go to different parks and places, that wasn't always possible. Can you have the next slide, please? And then kind of as we finish, we're just going to think about moving forward. And we think it would be great to see Zoom kind of used in times of crisis or when young people and whānau can't attend appointments. So just like Sarah mentioned before. We also see this is a need that whānau need to be upskilled on technology. Now, rangatahi, young people just have a natural advantage because they haven't really known anything else. But for a lot of whānau, it is a new way of interaction, and we just see that whānau do need this upskilling and potential resourcing, and perhaps that could be done through whānau peer navigators. We also see that we think this Zoom could be used really well through Zoom. Consultation and input from whānau into different areas could be done through Zoom. And yeah, just we think there needs to be this ongoing feedback from whānau and young people. Yeah, another thing, the data collection, we just think there's a real opportunity to reflect and look and perhaps dig a bit deeper into what has happened for whānau through this time. Can I have is there anything you wanted to add there, Jo?
You are unmuted.
I'll just add in regards to cultural consideration.
Sure.
You know, whānau-centred approaches are the key to cultural considerations. We need to look at ensuring consideration is had in regards to tikanga processes. Access to translators would be great. What we're seeing here in the mid-central area is a lot of rangatahi and tamariki that are fluent speakers in te reo Māori, the whole whānau are, and what they would like to see is the opportunity to engage with the health sector in their reo.
Oh.
And we need to recognise te reo Māori is a national language of Aotearoa, so that's just looking forward, you know, something to consider moving forward. The other thing we need to look at too is addressing institutional racism and unconscious bias within our systems to improve the experience of our whānau. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Joanne. And just to finish up, Joanne and I, and also Trish Lamb and Sue Cotton, who is part of our group, yeah, we just wanted to acknowledge the past and some of the gains that we've made in the past. So when Trish Lamb was family advisor at Wiri Workforce, she put together some fantastic documents participating in partnership guidelines for enabling effective whānau participation, and then also one that was about those whānau in CAM's AOD advisory position. So that was back in 2009. It is 11 years ago, but there's still great pieces of work, and we just think we should also remember the things that we've done previously and build on them in the future. So thank you very much for your attention today and for yeah, just engaging with us. Looking forward to the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Leigh, and thank you, Joanna. Just want to open up for a couple of questions. If there are any questions for Leigh and Joanne.
I had a brief query just in relation to Sarah's presentation with regard to kind of Zoom use and perceptions of it. And I was curious to look at the bit, I suppose, that didn't come through the presentation was what people's feedback is on face-to-face interviews, because with the numbers presented, I thought, well, if only 2% of the children that I saw told me that they thought my intervention was completely ineffective or hopeless, I'd probably be quite pleased with that statistic. So yeah, I was just wondering, it'd be interesting to see what the trends are for face-to-face. And I think that issue that was mentioned about social anxiety is a really interesting one. You know, do you say, well, actually, no, it's better to kind of force the children out of their comfort zone and get them to kind of experience face-to-face reviews, or do you say actually that they're just very anxious and they don't want to, you know, that they won't engage at all? If we offer appointments, they'll just DNA. So yeah, I think there's kind of certainly mixed feelings from my point of view that some people really like it, and that actually the ones that don't like it are quite a small percentage of the whole, really. I've been quite stunned with how quickly the children have taken to it. Obviously, with me being 44, I'm not quite as good at using technology, but the young people I've worked with, certainly in Te Aurere, just seem to take it to it like a duck to water, really. They don't bat an eyelid.
Angela, I know that Sarah's had to leave early. Did you have any thoughts to share on this?
Around that Zoom versus
yeah.
Face-to-face thing?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I do think we could be using it, you know, to our clients' advantage. But similar to what Ines has said, that the generational gap for some of us around mastering these things, doing them in a culturally safe way, is going to be a bit of a learning curve. But I do think it is something that we should look at. That when I think about the number of young people that we haven't been able to engage because they won't even leave their houses, it does sort of make us look at the way we're delivering our service.
Yeah, yeah. And, coming back to Joanne's slide around, supporting our whānau with this new way of working, I also think about our workforce and how nimble have we been, adaptable to, this kind of virtual space that we're now finding ourselves in. And so I think it is a message for all to really embrace this new way of working going forward. Look, I'd also really just wanted to tautoko Leigh and Joanne's kaupapa today, and I think it was really encouraging to hear from Leigh's slides that for some young people who were accessing acute care, that they found that experience to be very supportive, but also recognise from Joanne's kaupapa this morning that there is, still a greater need to continue on and building on the gains around being culturally sound and culturally supportive of our whānau and who are accessing our services. So I just wanted to again say thank you for Leigh and Joanne for sharing those experiences with us this morning, and Angela and Sarah. So I'm going to move us, we are in the last leg of our session this morning. I'm going to move us to the final part of this. This is where we're going to break into groups, and the conversation or the questions that we're going to be, that we want us to discuss in these groups is really building on the data that was shared with us this morning and thinking ahead about what we anticipate that data will look like for our services going forward. So James presented data of 2018, 19, 19, 20. So, and it was only looking at the snapshot of the early part of the year. And so I'd like us to use the next 20 minutes to have some discussions, and there will be facilitators in your breakout rooms around this question on the screen now. Once at the end, we will all come back together, and I'm going to ask just a couple of the facilitators to share some of their insights and stories from these sessions. So our technical team is dividing us now into breakout rooms, and we will reconvene in about 20 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Okay, it looks like everyone is back. Well, look, listen, thank you everyone for sharing your stories in the breakout rooms. And what we'd like to do as a KPI group is to summarize those thoughts and ideas and stories, and then share this via our the KPI website. So we'll capture that. We won't have time now to go through them, but we will provide that as a summary onto the website. So, but thank you all for participating in those work groups. So we've come to the conclusion of our session today, and I just really want to, on behalf of the KPI group, provide some summary, and also I'll then pass the time over to Kahurangi to close us off today. So really, this was a great opportunity to hear our journey through the COVID period, and it was really a great opportunity to kind of share with each other what it's been like for the services that we deliver. And I really wanted to say thank you for everyone for contributing today, and really today the voice of the young person came through some of the commentary that we've heard today, some of the surveys that they've been analysed and presented today. And so wanted to bring us back to why we are doing this, and this is using data to support and enhance the delivery of services to our tangata whai ora, our rangatahi and whānau. There are certainly some good experiences, some good practices that we've heard today. And so, the idea here is that we continue to encourage these experiences and share them with one another. And this is one platform that we use to enable these discussions to happen. Of course, there's an accountability aspect to this, is how do we ensure that these stories, and so this is where we all play a critical role in ensuring that some of these experiences, good practices, have been infiltrated down to our services. This is also an opportunity to look at where things need to be improved, and so data is one part of that story. We have our Whānau engagement advisors who bring in a very unique perspective to how we're using data to inform the way we move forward. We look forward to ongoing discussions with the sector around how KPI can continuously improve and enhance the way we deliver services. And so, as James, our program lead, mentioned earlier, we hope to have by October some new data sets that really shines the light onto what that experience, we've been able to speak to it anecdotally and provide some patient stories, but again, we want to now objectify this and look at data in 6 months' time, and then look at how that data will inform new ways of working going forward. So until we meet again, we've got some actions that we can take away, and we will be able to share with you on our website the summary of today's proceedings, but also future information for when we catch up next. So on behalf of the sponsorship group and the KPI group, really want to express thank you all for making the time to be with us this morning. Thank you for those who have participated and presented as well. We very much appreciate the time and effort that you've put into gathering that information and providing it to this group. So without further ado, I will hand the balance of the time to Kaharangi to close us off today, and take care and safe travel to everyone.
Oh, tēnā rā tātou katoa. I just want to make sure that I'm audible. Can I be heard?
You sure can.
Thank you very much. Okay, so before I finish, tēnei te mihi kia koe e Charles, mō tō mahi i kaitiakitia tātou katoa a mātou, I runga i tēnei mea ko te ipurangi, ko te Zoom hui, no reira kei te mihi kia koe, ko koe ra te kai awhina, te kai tautoko i tiaki i a mātou, no reira kei te mihi. So just a quick thank you to Charles and for facilitating this space. As we've all already heard about the difficulties of Zoom, it's a very hard thing to even host this webinar and be the front person of this. So hopefully on behalf of everyone, I just want to thank you, and you've done a fantastic job this morning. So cheers. And I runga i tērā tēnei te mihi kia koe anō e Charles, me te whānau I runga i te moana nui a kiwa. No reira kei te mihi. So just another quick mihi to our Pacific whānau that reside here in Aotearoa. Just so quickly before I finish, I just want to, I have been sitting quietly in the background, just really engaged and encouraged by the conversations that's been had today. And as I am the Principal Advisor Māori, this will help shape my thinking around going forward and advising Te Pou in this space. So thank you for sharing your kōrero. I guess just for the finish, for me to drop some thoughts, so one of these things is around, and I said this at a meeting last week, around data sovereignty and knowledge, and where that information is housed, because amongst a lot of Māori, this becoming a very key issue, is that a lot of data has been taken from our Māori whānau, and including not just Māori but non-Māori as well, and are very interested, maybe a wee bit concerned about where this data is being stored and how it is being used. So something for us to think about continually. In addition, I want to acknowledge Koka Jo Henare for her kōrero around cultural, appropriate cultural needs. So one of these things is to consider indigenizing your space. So what things we can do to ensure that the space that is provided is reflective of the people that we're serving. So one of those things is to, as a suggestion, is to never assume that you are the expert in the room and that the experts actually reside within the families. And so allow them to be the experts of how they function, their way of communicating to each other. And then lastly, in terms of, I love the kōrero around wharetapa whān, and with that, and trying to indigenize the actual KPI space, and considering that we could use Te Whare Tapawhā as an assessment to gain a wider knowledge about how people, how Māori or how Whānau are experiencing their world, and Whare Tapawhā is a perfect vehicle, a perfect waka to do that. So with those three little whakaaro, go well. I echo Charles's kōrero about going well into the future. We hope to see you guys in the flesh at some point in the future, and lovely to have you guys here today. So with that, I'll close our hui with our karakia. So kia tikara, me whakakapi te hui ngai runga I te kupu aroha te atua. No reira, pauhihiri, paurarama, tiaho I roto, marama I roto. Tēnā te pou, ko te pou ka eke, nā te pou nei kōrero, ka mā te ariki, ka mā te tauira, ka piti ki te whaiau ki te amarama, hui te ora, hui te maramatanga, haumie, hui e, tāiki.
Ai,